Right, good evening everyone. Welcome to the full council meeting of Telford and Wrekin Borough Council. Can I hand you over to our illustrious speaker?
Illustrious. Hey, he's learning. Right. Keith Osmond-Smith will lead us in prayers, but he's just rushed in. Are you ready? You're all right. Nice to see you. Come on.
Good evening, everyone, and we'll start with asking for prayers for everyone on the EP at the moment, I think. Let's pray. Almighty and loving God, we come together tonight, still in the aftermath of a difficult month for the lives of so many in our community. We bring before you those who have suffered damage and great loss through the storms of February, and we pray that they will know the continued support of friends and families as they strive to recover some semblance of normality. We give thanks for our emergency services, for the Shropshire Fire and Rescue Service, West Mercia Police and the West Midlands Ambulance Service. We thank you for their commitment to their calling and their skills and expertise, so clearly witnessed by so many in our community. And we are forever grateful for all the staff and officers of the Borough Council who worked tirelessly throughout the emergency, and for so many other agencies who worked together to bring relief and comfort to those affected by the floods and storms of February. There are many stories yet to be told, and so many people who deserve our thanks and praise for this commitment and for going the extra mile, not once but many times over, too many times to name and number, but without whom things might have been quite different. And I'd like to just take a moment just to pause and think about the good stories that have come out of these last few weeks, the friendships that have been built, the relationships that have been developed, and the good things that have happened. So, having paused for these few moments in quietness, we now bring before God tonight's meeting and agenda. We pray for our council, thanking you again for the good people gathered in this place, called and elected to undertake and prepared to be about the business of the Borough of Telford and Wrekin. We commend once more to your safekeeping our Mayor and Mayoress, our Speaker, the leaders of the Council, the Opposition, the members of this Chamber, the Chief Executive and his staff. And we're grateful afresh for these friends who give so much of their time and effort in the service of others. Meet with us tonight, our God, so that we may know the satisfaction and assurance of effective service and the peace that this brings, and help us to resolve to use all of our time more effectively in the life of service that we are called to follow. Amen.
Right, thank you, Reverend. Right, next item is apologies for absence. I have apologies from Jackie Loveridge, who I understand came out of hospital this afternoon, so we wish her well. Gemma Offland, Veronica Fletcher, Coldipsa Hota, and also to note that Councillor Concepta Cassar is still on maternity leave. Right. Are there any other apologies for absence? No, thank you. Declarations of interest, any? No? Right, lovely, thank you. Right, the minutes of the previous meeting of the 23rd of January, pages 5 to 18. Moved, seconded, all agreed? Right, thank you very much. Mayor to sign them. You wish to comment?
I'd like to move a 6-month leave of absence for Councillor Jackie Loveridge, who you just said has just come out of hospital due to ill health, for up to 6 months, please, Speaker.
And the final finish date for that would be the 5th of September. Is that seconded? All right. Can I ask any comment? Your agreement, please? Thank you. That's agreed. Right, moving on. Leaders' report and announcements.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome, everybody, and good evening. 2020 has certainly begun with a bang, and I want to highlight just a few of some of the most significant events of the year. I want to start with the devastating floods of the last few weeks, which has seen our borough at the heart of the national focus, with so many homes and businesses affected. The recent storms have tested our resolve in ways I think many of us could not have imagined possible. First with gales, then flooding from surface water and brooks, and streams bursting their banks, and of course the River Severn raging through our communities. But our communities, Mr. Speaker, were not broken. They came together. It's in the wake of these floods that hit homes and businesses that for anybody who visited could not be helped but to be moved. However, with the fantastic hard work of the Council, our communities, our partners, and in particular the Environment Agency, West Mercia Police, Shropshire Fire and Rescue Services, and our contractors, Balfour Beatty and Ida Verde, the floods would have been an absolutely devastating impact upon the communities, more so than they did. I want to give my heartfelt thanks to many council staff who, for the best part of 2 weeks, quite literally, Mr. Speaker, worked around the clock to help protect our residents as far as possible in the face of some of the most extreme conditions we have seen for many years. It is no exaggeration that many of our staff were working more than 80 hours a week protecting our residents. There are hundreds of examples I could quote: moving cars to prevent them becoming flooded, providing sandbags, pumps, clearing drains, evacuating people and animals threatened by flooding, to providing emergency accommodation, support and reassurance. Everyone involved has done a fantastic job, and one of which this council can be exceptionally proud of. Our residents, our businesses, our communities, our partners, all coming together as one to protect, invest and care in our community. Our focus is now moving on to those people, helping those people to recover from the effects of flooding and to support however we can. Last week I had the privilege of hosting and meeting the Secretary of State for the Environment in Ironbridge. I showed him the effects of the floods and how the barriers had buckled under the pressure of the swollen river. I told him we will, as a matter of urgency, be lobbying government for more permanent flood defences that can offer better protection for the homes right across the Ironbridge Gorge, and I hope that we all can join together on that lobbying campaign. Thank you to everybody who helped in their response. It is not over yet, Mr. Speaker, but I can promise the residents of the Gorge that over the weeks, months and years ahead, we will help them rebuild their homes, their communities and their businesses. I must also congratulate our staff and our partners involved in the provision of children's services, who Ofsted this week has rated outstanding. The first children's services outside of London to go from requires improvement to outstanding. The only, or I should say the first, children's services in the region to be outstanding. In 2011, Mr. Speaker, this council, when Labour took control, did not even have a director of children's services on the verge of failure. And today, in 2019-2020, Mr. Speaker, we are one of the best children's services departments in the country. And that's because of the fantastic hard work of our social workers who have put their heart and their soul into providing excellent and outstanding services. Together with Councillor Shirley Reynolds and Councillor Paul Watling for their leadership. And Mr. Speaker, I know this will be a motion later on today. In January, Mr. Speaker, our Shared Lives scheme was also rated outstanding by the CQC. Shared Lives was hailed as an exceptional and distinctive way in which to meet people's needs. Inspectors said that people were assisted by well-trained and highly motivated staff team. I am proud of each and every one of those team members, Mr. Speaker. And finally, last weekend we saw the arrival in Southwater of the 27-foot high knife angel. This impressive sculpture is made of 100,000 knife blades donated by police forces across the UK. It includes flick knives, pen knives, machetes and much more. And Mr. Speaker, I hope that all members take the opportunity to go and see that sculpture in Southwater. It certainly sends a strong message to our communities and together with the educational and therapeutic package that it comes with, I hope will just deter at least one young person from picking up a knife, because that will mean it is worth it. Mr. Speaker, 2020 has been a fantastic year to date, and we've only just started. Thank you.
Leader. Right, can I now call upon the Mayor to inform us of his appointments?
I'll keep this generally short and sweet. As you can see from the schedule in your agenda, item 6, the month of January, February has been busy for not just for myself but also for my deputy as well. So thank you, Amric, for your hard work there. I'm expecting my last few months as your mayor to be busy, so please keep on supporting us in that position, not just for myself but the mayoress and also my deputy. There are still tickets available for my charity murder mystery on the 27th at the Valley. Money's raised, as you're probably all aware, that it's for the YMCA. So if you are interested and you are able to come, I'll be very pleased to see you there. So a contact page, and it'd be just wonderful to see an absolute sellout of this event, which seems to be very, very popular. So I'll look forward to seeing you on the 27th. So thank you. That's all.
All right, thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are no public questions received, so we'll move on to Cabinet decisions made since the last meeting, pages 21 to 72 in your agenda. All right, I'd invite questions on points of clarification from members on key decisions. Are there any? Yes, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Speaker. It's on page 24 on the carbon neutral proposal, which is Councillor Hilda Rhodes. And we talk about procuring electric commercial vehicles for the council. I'd like to know how many vehicles we've procured since we declared a climate change emergency, and how many of those were diesel, petrol and the like, and what is our policy trying to go forward to switch things over to as many electric vehicles as we can. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wright.
Thank you for that question. I can't give him an answer this evening. I can give a written answer to him in the next few days. Obviously, we are committed to providing as many vehicles as we can that are sustainable in the long term.
Okay. Are you happy with that? Right. Councillor Dugmore. Tim Nelson.
Yeah, 2.1.3, page 21. Could Cabinet member explain why there's been no cross-party involvement in the drawing up of the carbon neutral action plan?
Okay. No cross-party involvement in drawing up the carbon neutral plan. Who's going to answer that?
Page 21.
Is it Councillor Rhodes?
Yes, yes. Oh, I'm there. Sorry, fine. I've got it.
Bear with us a moment.
So, sorry, what was the question again?
Yeah, can you use the microphone so everyone can hear?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you.
Yeah, could you just explain why there's been no cross-party involvement in the drawing up of the carbon neutral action plan?
Sorry, I'm listening to somebody else here. Yes, yes. There will be an opportunity later on in the meeting to explain a little bit more to you, if you don't mind. Is that all right with you?
I'll accept a written answer.
Or a written answer, yes, you can certainly have that.
Okay, if it's not covered in the later debate, then a written answer would be in order, yes? Okay, Councillor Tim Nelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There's a number of points. They relate to the Cabinet report in respect of climate change and also the action plan. Because of a number of points, I absolutely accept a written answer. Okay, so I'll make that clear to start with. Clarification, please. I mean, in the very first instance, can I have clarification whether the report is trying to achieve carbon zero or carbon neutral? Because the title is carbon neutral, but there is no plan B to be achieved. It only is achieved if we reach carbon zero. And there's a question about the attainability of that, but I will accept a written answer. The Cabinet report refers to natural woodland. I would ask why we don't know how much natural woodland we have that would provide sequestration. In the action plan itself, point 26, can we clarify why our contractors have not been asked to provide their own carbon reduction plans, because all of our main contractors have, and it's not difficult to find, their own carbon reduction plans. Carbon Action Plan point 39, can we need to clarify the carbon impact of first-time heating? Action points 53 and 54, when we review them in the action plan, if we could just clarify those, please. When you review the action plan, you'll see why I'm asking. It's a very technical point, this, but in action plan 55, can we clarify the reference to a calculation factor of 3.66, because that's not defined. And that, I think, amplifies very distinctly the point that my colleague, Councillor Dugmore, has made, which is that if we were engaged in this process before it was presented to us, we could ask these questions and we could resolve these issues rather than having to ask them now. Thank you very much.
Right, can I just check that we've got all those questions? Yeah, or do we need them? Yes. Okay, so we don't, yeah.
Or I can hand them in.
All right, thanks. And Councillor Rhodes will ensure that there is a written answer to supplied on those questions. Any other comments, questions for Cabinet members? Nope. All right, moving on, 7.3. Councillor questions. Okay, it's these, isn't it? Yeah, the first one I have listed is Councillor Peter Scott. Would you like to read out your question, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yeah, there in Newport, the local football and rugby teams have to regularly clear the pitches of dog faeces before a game can even commence. It is unhealthy, it is antisocial. Would the council consider a new bylaw to keep all dogs on leads on and around sports areas throughout Telford and Wrekin?
Okay. Councillor Overton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Peter, for your question. This council already issues fixed penalty notices for those that allow their dogs to foul and don't clean up after them. We will, however, be consulting on the use of public space protection orders to deal with dog-related offences over the coming months. The PSPOs are made under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act 2014 and can be used for a number of sanctions relating to dogs which may be detrimental to the local community's quality of life. Some of the sanctions that we may consult on are the exclusion of dogs from certain areas, dogs to be kept on leads in specific areas, prohibiting dogs from entering into certain areas such as parks and play areas, and any other measures which may have a positive impact. Following the consultation period, we hope that any PSPOs made will ultimately reduce antisocial behaviour and promote responsible dog ownership.
Right, thank you for that. Councillor Scott?
No subsequent as such, but can I have a written copy of that, please? And can you keep me updated with any progress? Thank you.
That's part, yeah, that's good.
Okay, thank you for that. Next question is Councillor Stephen Bentley. Could you read out your question, please?
On how many occasions have the flood defence barriers been erected along the wharfage since being acquired by this authority?
Thank you. Councillor David Wright.
Thank you, Speaker. Can I thank Councillor Bentley for his question? Now, our records show that there have been at least 17 separate deployments of the flood barriers at Ironbridge along the wharfage since they were secured in 2004. And members won't be surprised to learn that 4 of those deployments have taken place within the last 12 months. Due to the temporary nature of the flood defences, the Council is required to mobilise staff at short notice to install the barriers in partnership with the Environment Agency who own and store them. We also provide a rota of employees to staff the barriers 24/7 to ensure there is public safety in place. And there's obviously a cost to the Council for these activities in the region of £20,000 for each deployment. Now, although the flood barriers offer a level of protection during normal flooding events, specifically for residents along the wharfage, there are a number of properties along the gorge at Jackfield, Ferry Road and Colford, for example, that are not affected or protected by the temporary barrier. And many of these properties have been flooded in the last 2 weeks, and that's why we need to continue to lobby as a council to look at how we can try and protect those properties and not just the wharfage.
Right, thank you. Do you have a supplementary?
It's a very quick one. First and foremost, I'd like to echo the leader's words and place on record, obviously, our thanks as well to everybody in Ironbridge who contributed to everything that was going on there during that period of time. It was in the local paper last week where it mentioned that part of the reason the barriers buckled was the unevenness of the surface there. They've been deployed 17 times. How come we've not recognised this in the past?
Okay. Any answer to that?
Thank you, Speaker. The problem was the sheer level and volume of water passing through the gorge, which was unprecedented in nature. It's the first time we've got to a point where these barriers were potentially going to be topped out. The volume of water was significant. The roadway has been in good condition over the last few years. This was just an event which shows that we're going to need more permanent barriers in this particular location. It's significant this is a World Heritage Site. Obviously, the temporary barriers have served us very well. We're going to have a more permanent solution that fits in with the heritage requirements of the World Heritage Site. That's going to cost a significant amount of resource, and that resource will need to come from government in terms of protecting residents in the locality. We also need to explore some protection methods for the communities I've outlined that aren't currently protected by the temporary barrier system.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillor Bentley now has a question for Councillor Lee Carter. Would you read your question out, please?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Again, this was a newspaper report from Tom Crowther. So, and I was disappointed to read this. So, what measures have been discussed by the Cabinet to bring new impetus to the independent CSE inquiry?
Thank you.
The independent inquiry, as per their public update last week, have been making solid progress. I would encourage all members to follow their website for their updates. The Council has disclosed huge amounts of information to the inquiry, as have the police and other agencies, which amounts to 135,000 documents. The majority of these, around 780,000 pages worth, have been provided in a timely fashion by the Council. The inquiry is also speaking to witnesses. We are not cited on who or how many, and nor should we be. The inquiry are encouraging more people to come forward, and we will be giving voice to that request as we have done continually, including using the events planned across CSE Awareness Day in Southwater, Telford train station and Oaken Gate. In addition, members should note that during the autumn, the Council commissioned in record time the services of an out-of-area organisation of significant quality and reputation to provide comprehensive counselling support to people giving evidence to the inquiry. As set out last year, this is expected to be an 18-month-long forensic process. Eversheds, Tom Crowther QC are doing their job diligently, professionally and, most importantly, independently.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Bentley, do you have a supplementary question?
Yeah, other than CSE Day, and thank you for all the facts there, is there not more we can do to encourage those that have been victims in this horrendous crime to come forward?
Okay, thank you. Councillor Carter.
I think what I'd say to that is we have continually urged anyone with information that they feel is useful to come forward to the inquiry. We will continue to work with various groups who are promoting the fact that people should come forward. We'll do whatever we can in that respect. As I say, we're quite content at this moment in time that Eversheds and Tom Crowther QC are going about their work in a professional, a diligent and independent manner.
Right, thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't questioning what they were doing.
Okay, you can have conversations outside, but yeah, it's moot that you've raised it and you've been answered. Right, item 8, decision making. We have review of terms of reference for the Health and Wellbeing Board. Councillor Burford is to move it. It's pages 73 to 78 in your paperwork.
Yeah. This is just a tidying up exercise, Mr. Speaker. The different positions in terms of officers and members are reflected in the list of those on the board, and that is all it is. So I move formally.
Right, thank you. The recommendation is that the Council approves the amendments to the Health and Wellbeing Board terms of reference are set out in Appendix A, which commences on page 75 and 76, and it lists those that are appointed to the board. Second. Right, all I need now is a seconder, I'm advised. Councillor Overton seconds. Did you speak? No? Okay. Comments? Questions? Okay, I'll put it to the meeting. Do you agree the recommendation? Right, that's approved. Thank you very much. Right, we now move to item 9, Service and Financial Planning. So I invite Councillor Lee Carter to present the budget proposals. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Speaker. I'd like to move the recommendations within your pack. Overview and revenue budget, recommendations 1 to 25, the one recommendation within the capital strategy, the 6 recommendations within the capital programme, the recommendation in relation to the investment strategy report 2020-2021, the 3 recommendations Treasury strategy and Treasury update report 2020-2021, the recommendation within Prudential Indicators, and then the recommendation within the council tax formal resolution. And I'd just like to say a few words, if I could. I'll try not to take too long. First of all, I'd like to thank the staff across Telford Wrekin Council for the continuing work that they undertake on behalf of the authority, but particularly and most notably the staff within the finance team who do and have done for a decade now a sterling job in terms of keeping us on the straight and narrow in terms of our finances. I'd like to thank Scrutiny, who were chaired this year, Finance Scrutiny, who were chaired this year by Councillor Collier for their positive and constructive input. This is obviously the 10th Service and Financial Planning Report presented by the Labour Administration since we assumed responsibility for the Council in 2011. It is the first finance report since our record local election victory in May 2019, a victory that proved that the positivity and power of talking about what you will do rather than what you will no longer do, talking about solving problems and not creating them, and talking about building communities and not dividing them. But all the while rooting that talk in reality and, most importantly, financial reality. Within this budget report, we set out the financial foundations behind the blueprint for the next 4 years and beyond. Our message is to protect, care and invest in Telford and Wrekin, and that was, above all else, built upon firm financial foundations that the Labour administration has embedded since 2011, and the firm foundations on which we will continue to operate. And those financial foundations remain firm despite continued unprecedented uncertainty and cuts created by and instructed by the government. In many ways, when austerity first landed, we knew what we were dealing with. We knew that austerity was the method, sustained cuts set out clearly and upfront and over a period of time was the means. However, today the government are more contrived than that. From the dispatch box in London, they talk about levelling up, they talk about new record investment, yet the reality couldn't be any further from the truth. And their propensity to talk in terms that are intended to cynically fool the public can't overcome some basic facts. The fact that the government since 2010 has reduced funding to local government by 82%. The fact that the government last announced a long-term comprehensive spending review in 2015. The fact that national budgets are still short by 3.6 billion for adult social care, 3 billion for children's services, and £500 million each for public health and budgets to tackle homelessness. And locally, we've also seen a dramatic impact. Our council has been forced to make £123 million worth of savings, equivalent to £1,600 per household. Only about 8 pence in every pound we now spend in our net revenue budget is provided directly through the Government Revenue Support Grant. And whilst we have maintained council tax at the lowest level across the West Midlands, across the Midlands in fact, and amongst the lowest across unitary authorities in the country, this council now receives 67 million from council tax revenue. However, the costs of adult social care and children's safeguarding alone will total 81 million, with continuing pressures in those areas. The total income from council tax and business rates and the revenue support grant now only covers roughly 4/5 of what the council spend. And that's had a huge impact as an organisation. We've got over 1,500 less jobs, staff working for 25% less pay in real terms, senior and middle management numbers and back office costs cut by over a half, and major contracts have been renegotiated to generate millions of pounds worth of savings, but much more in terms of improved services. And perhaps one of the biggest things is that over the last 5 years alone, this council has now invested over £2.3 million into supporting local citizens' advice for their work in terms of providing debt and benefit advice and support, and over £300,000 to the local food bank, and many hundreds of thousands more into local organisations whose every existence is brought about by the heartless realities of austerity. And all of that should be a big badge of shame for the Conservative government. And it is only the fact that locally Labour have seen it through, have been resilient, have gone the extra mile, have used creativity, determination, collaboration to protect our communities is actually a badge of honour. We have been able to mitigate the worst by adapting some simple financial principles. First of all, we will continue to use capital investments to generate returns and additional income to invest in frontline services. Within the report before you, we do plan an extended capital programme. However, as has long been the case, this is planned over a longer time horizon in order to retain flexibility. The income from additional investments that we've made over the last 10 years now account for more than 30% of that £81 million of spend on adults and children's services, including nearly £1.2 million per year from our solar farm since it opened. And I do recall, and I've quite often pointed out, the fact that the opposition questioned whether we should do a solar farm or not, and because the sun didn't shine enough in Telford. The Labour administration have been so creative, we've made over £1 million off continual cloud cover, if you listen to some. Secondly, we continue to keep available as much one-off resource as is sensible in order to meet the cost of day-to-day cost pressures. Thirdly, we continue on a regular basis to identify efficiencies and savings that can be made across the authority. Within this report, that's £7 million over 2 years. And finally, partnerships. Libraries, community centres, markets, advice services have all been protected. New events, new community facilities, new environmental teams, new fit and fed holiday activities for young people, parks are all seeing new locally motivated investments because of those partnerships. All of those things would have stopped because of Conservative cuts. All those things are now protected because of a Labour council working in partnership with local partners in Dorley, Oaken Gates, Madeley, Sutton Hill, Donington, Mallingsley, Woodside, Brookside, Alston, Wellington, Newport and many more. And that deal we set out and those firm financial footings allow us to make investments despite the government. Tonight we set out our increased investment of £36 million in children's safeguarding. That's an increase of £4.9 million. That investment now means that this administration has increased investment in that area alone by £13 million since 2018. And we've heard tonight about the outstanding results that has delivered. To think that in 2018, the Conservative opposition within this chamber alluded to that budget being out of control within their alternative budget. We've also announced this evening increased investment of £45 million into adult social care. That's an increase of £3.9 million. We also propose increased investments into housing initiatives, tackling homelessness, a new fund to help pump prime our climate change initiatives, extra increased investment in small locally focused environmental pride schemes. Those, in terms of adults and children's, those two areas alone will now account for nearly 70% of our expenditure. When Labour took back control of the council in 2011, adults and children's accounted for less than one-half of expenditure. Those total investments, new investments of nearly £9 million, will be funded by making efficiencies and or generating new income of £3.3 million next year and £4.5 million a year after. And we will also use just over £1.4 million of one-off resources to help balance the budget. In terms of council tax, we also outline proposals for a general council tax increase of 1.99%, which will raise £1.35 million. The government also assume an increase in the adult social care precept of 2%. Those promises during the general election made by Boris surprisingly do carry a cost, and that cost is expected to be borne by the local council taxpayer. This precept increase in total will raise £2.7 million, all ring-fenced for adults and children's services. For the most observant, you will see that this Labour Council proposes a total extra investment 6 times the amount of that raised by the adult social care precept alone. But despite this increase, we envisage Telford and Wrekin will retain the lowest council tax rates in the West Midlands and amongst unitary authorities across the country. And within this report, we also set out a capital programme, extended but set out over a longer period of time. Firstly, £60 million for new property and housing and regeneration and investment fund to enable further long-term investments. That will include new affordable homes for rent, including through New Place, which, as well as providing safe, well-built homes for residents, has generated nearly £2 million in the last year alone for the council and continues to make a trading profit as a company. We will also invest in attracting new jobs and creating positive conditions for businesses to stay, to grow or relocate to our borough, which has this year generated nearly £3 million for the council and helped protect or create over 1,100 jobs. Profits from all of these investments will be used to help fund key frontline services, including adult social care and children's safeguarding. Additional council tax, new homes bonus and business rates will also be generated by these investments, which will also help to support essential frontline services. We also propose an extension of the capital programme of £26 million to be invested into the council's Pride programme of environmental improvements over the next 4 years, including £5 million for regeneration of our borough towns and high streets, £12 million for further improvements to our roads, footpaths, cycle paths and car parking provision, £5 million for environmental improvements and £4 million for improvements to maintenance of bus shelters, bridges and retaining walls. And we'll also allocate £2 million per year, which will be available as a contingency to fund additional priorities, such as reducing the council's carbon footprint and partnering with government and others. So tonight, obviously, we'll get comment and challenge from any opposition members, but I would say to any opposition member critiquing this strategy that if it's not this plan, then what is the plan? Because you have to look and see that if you want to change the balance of the things that I've set out, less capital programme, more use of one-off resources, that can only equal more savings. And if you propose more savings, then you need to be clear and upfront with us how you would what you would save, how and when, and will it be of the scale to bridge the budget gap. On the whole, this is a robust, thorough and diligent approach to our finances, whilst at the same time setting out our ambitious programme built on firm financial foundations. And our ambitious programme includes maintaining a safe Telford and Wrekin, a clean Telford and Wrekin, a Telford and Wrekin where the roads, footpaths and cycleways are well maintained, a Telford and Wrekin where we have first-class schools and education facilities, a Telford and Wrekin where there are good jobs and a thriving local economy. And for me, most importantly, a Labour-led Telford and Wrekin. And that's vital because it's Labour whose heart and soul is connected to our local communities, and it is only us who understands our first duty is to lead with compassion and kindness. And if we don't, we deserve to have no other duties. I'd like to move.
Thank you, Councillor Carter. Councillor Davis? Reserve right to speak. Right, I now call upon Councillor Andrew Reid, Leader of the Opposition, if you wish to speak, or your nominee. Right, Councillor Lawrence.
Thank you, Speaker. Obviously, Lee's made a number of assertions there, and of course, as always with Lee, there's some truth in what he says. You certainly did win a good majority in the last borough election, but since then there's been a general election where your ideology was thoroughly rejected by the nation. This is also the first budget meeting we've had since your declaration of a climate change emergency. Now, I notice you briefly mentioned it there, but it's, in the opinion of our members and residents, not an emergency in the way you've declared it, because you don't give it much priority in this budget, and you hardly even mention it. So the last couple of weeks I've been speaking to residents, and in particular some of the climate conscious members of my ward, and they had high hopes for your proposals that you are putting forward tonight, that action would be taken to address some of their concerns about climate, etc. And tonight we've seen your other paper becoming carbon neutral, which, to be fair, is a very good report. I applaud you in what you're doing with that. There's a lot of good initiatives in there. But to give you some context for it, in 2017, the borough-wide emissions were 925,000 kilotons of CO2. And in your report, you quite carefully highlight the reductions that you've made, and you've got the level down to 8,000 tonnes in 2018. So that's some achievement. But if you look at the numbers, that's only about 1% of the borough's emissions that are related to Telford and Wrekin Council directly. So a lot of the initiatives that you're talking about in your proposals aren't actually in your budget report, and very, very few of your proposals actually impact on the climate change emergency which the country and this community is facing. One thing we voted on at the last council meeting was the council tax base. If you recall, we had 76,200 odd properties in the previous year, and we've now got 77,494 in the current budget. That's an increase of 1,260 properties, and a typical property in the borough generates about 3 tonnes of CO2. So what you've actually got is 3,900 tonnes of extra CO2 from your proposals. So what that is about, and I'm highlighting this because your proposals are about the growth of the borough, increasing the number of homes in the borough, but not in a way that is environmentally friendly. So one of the things that residents wanted and you've not had is more initiatives in your budget to tackle these type of issues. All you've actually got so far is £100,000 for an officer and support, and a potential contingency for things like purchasing vehicles, etc. So that is a start, but it's nothing like the response that residents want, and really the feeling is that this is a disappointing budget and an opportunity missed to do more for climate change. So turning to tax, yes, you're putting forward another tax increase again. If there had been more climate change type of initiatives, we'd be a lot more supportive of it. But we do understand that austerity is coming to an end now. The economy is in a better position. Yeah, well, austerity, but you talk of austerity, or Lee talked of austerity. It was the Labour government that ran the large deficit. Okay, it was banking related, but the Conservatives have only reduced that deficit down. The austerity target is not something we wanted to create. We've been the doctor treating the patient that you infected, the coronavirus of the economy. So turning to debt, it's a big concern we have, the level of debt. If you look at the current forecast in the financial model, it's £291.3 million, which is a grand figure of £3,900 per household. If you look at your forecast for next year, that's forecast to rise to £330.4 million, and by 2024 to rise even further. So we get to a level of something like £441.8 million, which is about £5,600 per household. So this is a legacy that future residents of Telford and Wrekin have got to carry. You're achieving your initiatives, and your residents did vote for you, so we accept that you've got a mandate to deliver, but it's by mortgaging the future to achieve that in some ways. And our concern is that in the future, when there's another Conservative administration, it's we're the ones who'll be picking up the tab that you leave behind. So I mean, of course, there's some merit in a lot of your proposals, and of course there's a lot of hard work gone in by officers. But sadly, we can't support it because you don't address the emergency in the climate which you declared. Thank you for your time.
Right. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Tomlinson.
First of all, Mr Speaker, I just want to put our group's admiration and gratitude for all the work done by this local authority and the Environment Agency and others with what happened down in Ironbridge, and even to a smaller degree on my own housing estate where we have a brook that decides every now and again it's going to flood, and I've tried to do remedial work on that. So I really do want to thank all the officers on this council for everything they've done. It's been really intense over the last month. I also want to put on thanks, our gratitude as well, to all the officers, directors, staff who've had to bring this budget to the fore, particularly the finance staff who've managed to create an inch worth of paperwork, which is worth every penny, even though it affects the environment, so thank you for that. But particularly for all those staff that have to live continuously with thinking, aren't they going to be in a job next week? It can't be very easy when you're having to do that, and to try and plan and be positive with what's going on, because we're having to look continually at savings all the time. Last year, and this is no criticism of the council at all, I admire what the council's doing, they had to spend an additional £3 million on adult social care and an additional £2 million on children's social care. £5 million. And that this year is going to grow even further than that, and they've put that into the budget. The council tax increase is the maximum that we can put through without going to some consultation is 3.99%. We'll raise 2.7%. That barely covers half of the cost price pressures that we had this time last year. So what does the council do? And it's limited in raising its council tax, and it's got at least £5 million to spend on adult and children's social care, which it should invest. These are the most vulnerable in our society, which maybe a lot of people don't see. But they're there. We have to support those children. Our excellent status in that children's wouldn't come about if we hadn't spent that. Adult social care, those vulnerable adults need our support. Where's the government? Where's the government in funding this? It gives us an extra levity to raise council tax by 2.2% for an adult social care precept, and in my calculations that only gives us half of the increase at least that we need to invest in adult social care. So what are we going to do? Well, we have to cut yet again 3.3 million cuts in other services next year. We've had to raid the balances of 1.4 million, which over a length of time can be supported, but not forever. There has to come an end. There has to come an end to all these cuts. It felt like Father Christmas had come, I should imagine, in a finance team, when for the first year in ages, the government decided it wasn't going to cut our government grant. It barely gave us an increase, but it at least stayed where it was. We shouldn't be celebrating that. The government should recognise that when adult and children's services need financing, the finance should come. This isn't a plea or a complaint on behalf of this local authority, it's for all local authorities up and down the country. Demography is demography. People are getting older, we've got more of those people we're trying to look after in our society. That needs funding. We're all going to have relatives at times that need that care. If you have to rely completely on council tax, which, as I said before, is limited and you can't give you all the increase you need, you're only reliant on the council tax base that you have. That council tax base you have is based on the value of the houses within the borough. We, because we have more deprivation in other areas in this country, have a lower council tax base. Our houses are worth less. So over the years, even if we raise council tax by the maximum, the amount that we can raise to go towards all these increases in costs is going to become less and less compared to those more affluent authorities. So is it right that if you live in a more affluent area and raise your council tax, you can get more money and you can spend more on adult and children's social care? If that's the case, why don't we do it with the police? Those who live in an affluent area have a better police force. Why don't we do it with the NHS? Those that live in a better area can have a better police. It's absolutely nonsense. These should be nationally funded costs which are based on need, not based on how much value of your housing stock that you've got. This is immoral. Also, think of those people that are having to pay it. Pay increases aren't that large. Some people are living off minimum pay. We're having to raise council tax by 4%. A lot of people can't afford this. We have a scheme which has had to get watered down because we can't afford it to the full, where those who are most or least well off, most worst off, we can't give them the support that we wish to give. We passed a resolution The previous council, we did one before, where we left what we support people by neutral. It's not good enough. We should be looking for those on the least income to give them even more support, and we can't do it because we can't afford it. That's where we need this additional money. I don't believe in opposing for opposition's sake. There may be elements in this budget which, in detail, I can't fully support. I would wish that we could give more support to council taxpayers. But I wholeheartedly support 98% of what's in this report. It's the best we can do with what the government's given us. We must implore, I've got 4 minutes, I'll carry on, thank you for that. I must implore our MPs to look again at how local authorities, particularly our local authorities, are funded. It's got to come, the pressure's got to come from them and from the public asking them. Councils need a fairer funding base. Otherwise, we're going to leave people in the mire. The member opposite there mentioned about climate change, and we can agree with what he's got. But isn't it difficult, and you'd find this in your own budget at home, when you're thinking, well, actually, we could do with investing a bit more in those measures that are necessary. It often needs an investment or a change of the way we do things, maybe in electric vehicles. You can only invest, you can only put money in when you've got the money to invest in it. If we're forever focused on trying to find out how are we going to survive next year, how are we going to survive the year after that, it's very difficult to focus on looking at the future. We must have that money coming from the government. Thank you.
Councillor Sean Davis.
Mr Speaker, I'm proud to second this budget. And yet again, for the 9th year running, we have the main opposition party opposing for opposition self. And Mr Speaker, again, no alternative budget from them. No ideas, no detail, just moans, groans and sound bites from the leader of the opposition in waiting, or whoever it is going to be. And Mr Speaker, we've heard it time and time again, haven't we? They voted against the solar farm. Now they talk about the climate emergency. They voted against the funding for LED street lighting, which cut carbon significantly. They voted against that. They voted against investing money in footpaths and cycleways, and now they talk about the climate emergency. They voted against new place, Mr Speaker. Now they talk about the climate emergency and warm homes. Mr Speaker, the basic reality is that over 9 years, the same thing is true. It's the Tories are hypocritical in this chamber, and they know that they are. And Mr Speaker, what do they talk about? About their government, the government action, a government that has cut feed-in tariffs, but they talk about the climate emergency, a government that abolished the Department for Climate Change, but they talk about the climate emergency. And Mr Speaker, they talk about the climate emergency and then vote against or fail to support, probably abstain, a £4 million package over the next 2 years to tackle climate emergency. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And Mr Speaker, by failing to support this budget, you are voting against or failing to support an additional £5 million into children's services, an additional £3.9 million into adult social care, an additional £5 million into the high street investment in Newport, Wellington, Madeley, Dorling, Oaken Gates, and you're voting against £21 million investment into our roads, into our footpaths, into our communities, into our infrastructure. The reality of the situation, just like every year, you can write a book on it. They oppose it for opposition's sake. They fail to put forward a positive alternative. I know exactly what they're against, Mr Speaker. I don't know what they are for. And the reality is also, Mr Speaker, that it's this Labour Council, supported by sensible opposition parties most of the time, taking this borough forward, creating a better borough, protecting, investing and caring in the place that we call home, not talking it down, not being negative all of the time, and not trying to play silly political games. Mr Speaker, it's time that we backed a progressive budget. This is a progressive budget, despite the difficult challenges put forward by central government reductions. It helps the most vulnerable. And Mr Speaker, those people who vote against this, yet again, Mr Speaker, will be reminded at each and every photo opportunity they turn up to that they want the praise, they want the soundbite, but when it matters, they will not put their hand up and support a package of investment like this one.
Right, thank you. Right, any other councillor wish to comment? Right, Councillor Clear.
Only just a brief comment, Mr Speaker. I chaired the finance scrutiny this year, which was a relatively good process. I'm just disappointed that obviously Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Carter were on that committee, and nobody actually raised the issue of climate change within the budget for this year, which I find quite surprising. It would have been quite useful if they had any issues in that area, if they'd have raised it during the scrutiny period so that we could have looked into that in further detail.
Okay, thank you for that. Anybody else wish to comment? Yes, Councillor Burford.
Just very briefly, it's a privilege to be in this role of health and social care on the Cabinet, in an authority which takes its responsibilities seriously and does its best under austerity, which incidentally is itself an ideology. The authorities, the countries in this world that come out of that world recession in 2008, that crisis, are the ones who've invested in their economies and invested in their people. They've come out better. We're still struggling with the effects of that austerity. Let's just remember that, by the way. But going back to what I was saying, it's a privilege to be in an authority that's doing its best under these circumstances to protect its most vulnerable. You've heard Councillor Carter talk about the 3.9 million invested in adult social care in this budget. We need more. Our staff work under incredible pressure and do a brilliant job in managing within that budget. But you know the demographic trends. And all the while, how long have we been waiting for the government to come up with a plan for social care? How many years has this gone on? Still we wait. Still we wait for something which is a realistic, costed plan going forward, whilst councils across this country are in crisis with adult social care. It is a national scandal. It's one where we've protected ourselves against better than most, but we cannot go on without that certainty going forward of where we stand financially and with the support of national government. Incidentally, the same applies with the weasel words that we hear from the other side about climate change. The initiative has to come. There has to come from government to make the big impacts. Local authorities can't do this by themselves. I think the plan we've got is the very best under the circumstances. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to comment before I call upon Councillor Lee Carter? Right, Councillor Carter, would you like to reply, please?
Well, in 5 years doing this role, I've learnt a lot of things to be true in Telford politics, and one of those new things has developed tonight, actually, that the Conservatives have left the field of play in its entirety. Hardly any comments about the opposition budget. I gave you a challenge to stand up and say that if it's not this strategy, then what strategy should it be? And you've not put one forward. You didn't have the courtesy to attend scrutiny and have input into some of these things and make suggestions. Didn't turn up to Cabinet to have an input into these things. Just what is your role here? Just to a couple of specifics. You've continually been on the wrong side of the argument, and thankfully we've been on the right side of the argument. As Councillor Davis said, the solar farm. You talk about the climate emergency. You spent a lot of your time, Councillor Lawrence, talking about the climate emergency. That solar farm doesn't just generate £1.2 million. It's run on clean energy, generates clean energy. You actually described it as speculative in 2017. Only last year, and I'm sure many of us can remember last year, about austerity. In 2019, last year, a couple of you at that podium there said that austerity didn't exist, that cuts didn't exist. This year, you're saying it's all over, or it will be over soon. So which one is it? In terms of our investments, some of our investments, and I know, again, you've said about debt. Effectively, if you are against this capital programme, you are against many of the things that are important to local residents. So the economy, generating jobs, I've noticed many of you have been opposite have been fans and supporters of Newport Innovation Park, which is funded through the Capital Programme. A lot of you have championed the fact that we saved and we rescued Audley Avenue estate and protected jobs there, funded through the Capital Programme. But that doesn't surprise me, even though that investment programme in terms of the economy and jobs generates £3 million for the council this year and has protected or created 1,100 jobs. You described that in previous discussions as a mismanagement of taxpayers' money. In terms of greater improvements to roads, footpaths, cycleways, the way you've proposed solving that in the past is to spend £20 million less than we propose. How is that going to maintain the infrastructure? In terms of commercial property that generates £8 million a year for this authority, you've called that in the past unpredictable. Residential property, i.e. new place, you've said that coupled with our plans for expanding that residential property portfolio, describe the council as having no commercial experience and wasting millions, even though we've become one of the largest private sector landlords within Telford and Wrekin, generating 400 well-built, safe homes for local residents. So as I say, something that's been added to the fact that the truths in Telford politics are that not only have you left the field, you continue to be hypocritical. I think we've had all the comments that we wanted tonight. It's clear that this budget is going to be supported. We've moved the recommendations, and Speaker, I suggest we crack on with things.
All right, thank you for that. The recommendations are summarised on pages 81 to 84. We will take them en bloc, and it will be a recorded vote. Thank you.
Councillor Bentley.
Predicated on the fact I love hypocrisy. I'm against it.
Okay.
Councillor Blundell. Councillor Boylan. Councillor Burford. Councillor Burrell. Councillor Callier. Councillor Eric Carter. Councillor Lee Carter. Councillor Cook. Councillor Davis. Councillor Dugmore. Councillor Reid. Councillor Arnold England. Councillor Nathan England. Councillor Evans. Councillor Ian Fletcher. Councillor Greenaway. Councillor Healy. Councillor Holt. Councillor Hoskin. Councillor Yanker. Councillor Dwar. Councillor Jones. Councillor Kiernan. Councillor Lavery. Councillor Lawrence. Councillor McClements. Councillor Mehta. Councillor Middleton. Councillor Murray. Councillor Nelson. Councillor Overton. Councillor Pinter. Councillor Gilly Reynolds. Councillor Shirley Reynolds. Councillor Steve Reynolds. Councillor Rhodes. Councillor Scott. Councillor Seymour. Councillor Charles Smith. Councillor Malcolm Smith. Councillor Thompson. Councillor Karen Tomlinson. Councillor Bill Tomlinson. Councillor Turley. Councillor Watling. Councillor White. And Councillor Wright. It's carried.
Right, that is carried. Thank you very much for that. We now go on to item 10.1, notices of motions. Councillor Shirley Reynolds will propose the altered motion as tabled. Okay.
During the last 4 years, since the last Ofsted inspection, the Government has slashed Telford and Wrekin Council's funding, with the revenue support grant being reduced by 8.485 million, 46%. But this Labour Council has continued to invest an extra 13.77, 53% in our family support. This Labour administration has a very clear and ambitious vision for vulnerable children and families in Telford and Wrekin. We have endeavoured to deliver excellent children's services and ensure we provide outstanding services that benefit children and their families. Children's services in Telford and Wrekin Council are outstanding. Those 9 words encapsulate 9 years of hard work and dedication by our staff, parents, carers and all of our other partners. This administration wants outstanding children's services for all families. This council calls on the government to provide a comprehensive funding increase for children's services for all local authorities, to provide a service for every child they would welcome for their own. Yes, we are outstanding. We are the only authority in the West Midlands and North West of England to have achieved this fantastic judgment. We are the first council outside of London to go from requires improvement to be good in 2016 to outstanding. This is a remarkable accomplishment which reflects 9 years of hard work for our administration, with a clear focus on improving services since we took control of children's services from the opposition. Children's services which they had not invested in. In 2011, when we took control of the council, the judgment was verging on being inadequate, and they didn't even have a director of children's services. That was the value the opposition gave to our children. We are very clear. Our aspiration is to improve outcomes for our vulnerable children, young people and their families. We will honour our manifesto pledge to protect, care and invest in all families across the borough. This has been a long journey, and like all journeys, it needed a good roadmap with very clear destinations along the way. And like all journeys, it came at a cost. Sadly, the Tory government has not valued children's services during the last few years. The Tory government has slashed our funding by 118 million. Well, I, for one, cannot put a price on our children's safety, and neither can my fellow Labour councillors. This has been a council-wide effort. Every time we launched a new commercial venture, whether that be new place, solar farm or expanding our commercial footprint, we have been very clear. Every pound of profit would go into frontline services. During the last few years, the government's continued to cut the budget, but we have invested an extra 14 million into children's services. This is the difference we have made as a Labour council. Extra investment year on year. Our income-generating projects have enabled this investment. We have generated 62.5 million since 2011. Sadly, the opposition didn't support this approach. How can they disagree with income generation to provide frontline services to our residents? It beggars belief. The profit from the solar farm provides hundreds of thousands of pounds. Profit for frontline services? No. They voted against it. New place, it provides affordable quality homes, security for families. Yet again, they voted against it. Investment in our property portfolio to create further income generation. Guess what? They voted against it. Unbelievable. We are ambitious and want more for families. We want very clear our aspiration is to improve outcomes for vulnerable children and families, honouring our manifesto pledges to protect, care and invest in all families in the borough. Our aspiration has been recognised nationally, and I was delighted to receive a letter from Yvette Stanley, the National Director of Social Care, congratulating us on our work. We are incredibly proud of our workforce and the role they have played in achieving this outcome. They are committed, dedicated professionals. An example of their exceptional practice is evidenced in the report. Myself, the leader and the former cabinet member met staff personally to thank them for their hard work and dedication. And I would ask that you join with me tonight and you thank them formally. We deliver high-quality social work. We care about and invest in our staff. Over the last few years, we've improved social workers' recruitment and retention rates. And unlike other local authorities, we can attract and keep our staff. We support them, providing high-quality training, excellent support and supervision. Our staff make a difference every day to children's lives. It's the most important thing that they do, and we could not have provided our outstanding service without them. This has been a big team effort over the last 9 years, and I want to say a special thank you to Councillor Paul Watling, who has been on this journey for the best part of a decade. His commitment, passion and values has led to the transformation, and what a transformation. Ofsted's words ring out loud and clear. In Telford and Wrekin, children are cared for and they're cared about. Those few words have a lot of meaning, and our residents know we put their needs first.
Can you wind up,
Residents showed
please?
this, trusting us clearly in the May elections with their outstanding victory. I want outstanding services for all families across the country. Join with me, call on the government to provide a comprehensive funding increase for children's services for all local authorities. Across the chamber tonight, support the motion and show residents that we protect, care and invest in our children, and that is what makes us outstanding.
Right, thank you, Councillor Reynolds. Councillor Paul Watling, you wish to reserve your right? Okay, we now open it for general debate. Anybody else wish to comment? Right, Councillor Davis.
I would like to recognise that local authorities face significant challenges in delivering effective children's social care services, but the fact that they are so important to most vulnerable children means it is essential that they are delivered at a high standard. The fact that Telford Wrekin Council has achieved an outstanding rating demonstrates that this can be achieved. I was impressed to see the significant progress that has been made since the last inspection. It is clear that leaders and managers know their service well, which is having a positive impact on the whole of the service. It's good to see that Telford Wrekin Council has committed and experienced a stable social workforce who feel valued and well supported, underpinned through investment in quality training and development and a strong, positive ethos. I would like to congratulate everyone at Telford Wrekin involved in achieving this excellent outcome and becoming the first authority in the West Midlands to be rated outstanding under the new Ofsted framework. Not my words, Mr Speaker, but the words of Vicky Ford, the Minister within the Children and Families Department. Mr Speaker, I do hope that our local MPs will take the time to congratulate our staff, because they haven't so far. And I do hope that members opposite will take the time to thank our staff, because many of them, not all of them, because there's been some private emails that I've received from some who have done that, will take the opportunity today to publicly praise them. And I do hope, Mr Speaker, that both our MPs, together with local councillors, will have the humility to thank Councillor Reynolds, Councillor Watling and this administration for the investment, leadership and vision over the last 9 years. We took a Children's Services Department in 2011 that didn't even have a Director of Children's Services on the brink of collapse. The Children's Services Department being run by the Chief Executive despite national guidelines to the contrary. And we've transformed that to one of the best children's services services in the whole of the country. That is for everybody in this chamber to be proud. We stand together with our staff, and I do hope that the members opposite will apologise for the attacks over the last 9 years, apologise for voting against, as they have done tonight, additional investment into children's services, and praise our staff, praise our vision, praise our investment. I won't hold my breath, Mr Speaker.
Right, thank you. Councillor Nigel Dugmore.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I find it a bit bizarre that abstaining against a motion is counted as voting against. That seems a bit weird. But anyway, never mind. You live in a weird world, some of you. Firstly, I would like to take the opportunity to congratulate all the teams in Children's Services for their outstanding Ofsted inspection. It goes from requiring improvement to outstanding in such a short period of time, and it's absolutely tremendous. And my congratulations go to everybody who's worked hard, regardless of who or what they've done. With regards to this motion, though, it must be stated that it doesn't matter what your political persuasion is. We all want to provide a first-class service for our children and their families. No administration has exclusivity regarding excellence, and it belittles the achievements of the officers and workers who deliver the services to make it a political issue. The key challenge now is to maintain the outstanding service, and a little clarity in what extra funding would deliver would be very welcome. Every local authority in the land wants an increase in funding provision. Looking at it from the government's viewpoint, with limited resources, funding will be targeted to areas that are most in need and will have the greatest impact. Therefore, funding will be directed to those authorities that are failing, as opposed to those that are successful. So it's naive to assume that a funding review will necessarily deliver more money. In fact, it could actually deliver less money to those more successful authorities, so you have to be careful what you wish for. I therefore would suggest that we as the Council should be cautious in our approach and cite specific areas that require extra resources than this belt and braces demand for extra money. I'm happy to support the motion, and let's hope that the children's services will grow from strength to strength.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Burrell.
Allow me to begin by unreservedly welcoming the recent judgment given by Ofsted on the overall effectiveness of children's services within the borough. The award of a verdict of outstanding is cast into shadow only by the sheer scale and trajectory of improvement in children's services since they were last inspected in June 2016, where Ofsted found improvement was required in 3 out of 4 service areas. To progress from a service that requires improvement to outstanding in successive inspections is an almost unheard of achievement, and we wish to give our unalloyed thanks and congratulations to each and every member of our Children's Services team for the dedication to change and sheer hard work they have put in to obtain this judgment. We are all very much aware of the reduction in a block revenue grant model to local authorities in recent years, as government seeks to drive localism by devolving a range of revenue-raising powers to the local and away from the national level, allowing councils far greater freedom to raise, retain and allocate funding in a manner best befitting the local needs and priorities they identify. The success of these changes is demonstrable in the context of the improvement in our services for children since 2016. The power to develop and drive its own revenue streams allowed this council to direct increased funding towards its stated priority areas and empower the teams in those areas to use that funding in the most beneficial way for young people in the borough. That children's services in the borough are now outstanding is not despite changes to the national government funding model, but in part due to the freedom brought about by those changes and the localism agenda that drives them. Telford Wrekin has demonstrated in a very powerful way how to employ the localism agenda to drive dramatic service improvement. It has shown that better services need not be dependent on poorly prioritised, ring-fenced government grants. This council has a golden opportunity to share the experience of its children's services team with other local authorities to help shape and improve services for young people across the region into the future. Instead, this motion asks us to face into the past, demanding funding increases from national government that the improvement in our children's services shows to be categorically unnecessary. This motion seeks to set aside the celebration of an outstanding performance and service improvement in favour of pithy, pointless political point scoring, which is most unfortunate and undeserving of the value teams that helped to bring it about. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bill Tomlinson.
I've never heard such claptrap in all my life. First of all, I want to put on record my congratulations and an appreciation from our group from all the sterling work done by the administration and the Children's Services team for all that they do. And it's not just getting this award or acclamation that's important, what it means to those young people who are receiving those services. This year alone, we spent an extra 3 million. It's not just good words and good practice. You need the resources to do this job. And I look to this side and say, you're saying leave the funding model to be flexible. We've had to make cuts in other areas to actually fund adult and children's social services. We're getting less money. They're taking money off us every single year, and despite that, we've managed to invest it by cutting elsewhere. That's not flexibility. That's trying to take credit for something despite the fact you've cut the money away from us. It's obscene what you're trying to say. And it's an absolute... Anyway, I won't say any more on that one. It is obscene. Money hasn't just had to be invested this year. It's been invested over the last few years. And I guarantee, I shall make a prediction, which politicians should never do. I predict in about June, July, August, when we look at the expenditure of the current year against budget, adult and children's social services will be overspent. We shall look to Ken and his team in the finance department, who've managed to escape, to come out like the cavalry as always, to find out we've hopefully over budgeted in interest again. And if the government and everything can't find they came up with 3 million this year, and they will more than likely have to come out with another 3 million because we will be overspent. And this is not a criticism of this local authority. We'll be overspent because more adults will have presented themselves that need care. We have a national formula. We can take so much from them for their care. We have to fund the rest ourselves. We will have additional children coming into our system, either through the legal processes or others, that say, you need to care for these extremely vulnerable individuals. We have no choice. Those cost pressures will come. We can try and fine-tune what we do to the best of our ability and keep it as streamlined as we can. But those pressures are there. It is ridiculous to say that we can fund this ourselves. It will come to a halt. It won't be long where we simply can't fund these anymore. And we need those excellent services to prevail for everybody. Remember those that we're supporting. I would like to quickly applaud the MP for Telford, Lucy Allen, for challenging us in the way we deal with youngsters with regard to CSC. However, she needs to put her money where her mouth is.
Could you wind up, please?
Yes, I'll wind up. We need those MPs now to say, right, we demand an extra from Telford and Wrekin. We need the money for Telford and Wrekin to support those children. It's got to come from government.
Right, thank you. Councillor Ian Fletcher.
Mr Speaker, fellow councillors, this is quite an interesting motion from Councillor Reynolds, and her motion proposing it, I wasn't sure whether we were talking about local rape grants, rape support grants, or dedicated schools grants. I mean, it's not quite clear. So I know it says rate support grad, so I actually went and tried to work out whether her figures were correct. I always like checking figures. And I actually extracted information from the House of Commons library to verify her assertions. And if you look at the amount of revenue support grant for each year from 2016 down to 2020-21, which is the 4 years mentioned by the Councillor in her speech, she says it's 8.54 million reduction. I'll calculate it's a 16.1 million reduction, according to the figures there. So I'm wondering whether her figures are correct. Perhaps you could supply me with the information that she gave us.
To reply, can you cover it then?
Yes, you do have a right to reply. You can tell the truth. But actually, as has been mentioned by other people, in that time, the 4 years, the service has improved considerably, mainly due to I feel, the staff involved in the thing. I had some contact with them because I was on the virtual school governing body, so I had a lot to do with certain children in care and their looking after them. And it's a large amount of work that they've done, and I congratulate them all. But going back to the money, the services have improved despite the revenue support grant going down. Well, I'm trying to work out why, but I looked at the tables in the House of Commons library, and it seems that the total amount of monies available to spend for the council has actually stayed reasonably stable, because that total amount of money includes not only the revenue support grant, it includes the new homes bonuses, the council tax revenue, because as you build more houses, you get more council tax, and of course the business rate, because the government has said that we can retain more and more percentage of the business rates. In fact, it goes up to 75% in the coming year, according to the information in the House of Commons thing. But it doesn't include ring-fence funding for schools, which has remained stable. So I've got to finish now. The other thing that's missing from your thing, and I'm sure you might have noticed it, that on the 24th of February, there was a further £9.3 million allocated to Telford and Wrekin by the government. And you seem to have missed that from other things. Your proposal gives me concern, as though you actually not know what you're doing. Thank you.
Right. Councillor Paul Watling.
Mr. Speaker, well, that was quite bizarre, really, those three speeches from the Tory benches. I'm proud and honoured to second this motion. Some of you know that the only reason I stood as a councillor in 2011 was because I was concerned about the state of our children's services under the previous Conservative-led administration. And once appointed as lead member for children, my concerns were justified. I found a department that was at a low ebb, with officers deflated and leaderless. A previous administration had deleted the post of Director of Children's Services and amalgamated it with the Chief Executive's post. We immediately reinstated that post, appointed a suitably qualified director, a move, by the way, which was deemed as a total waste of money by the members opposite. This long journey started then from near inadequate rating in 2012 to an outstanding rating in 2020, at a time when Tory-led governments have attacked local authorities with their stringent cuts and reduction in funding for preventative services. We here in Telford have bucked the trend and continue to invest in our children and families, because we really do believe that every child matters. This has been a corporate approach, though, and the leadership of this has been across the whole of the organisation. The strategy of bringing new income into the authority by such projects as New Place and the solar farm have given us the freedom to develop the work that has led to this rating. Finally, I need to address this issue that has been raised by members opposite over the last couple of years regarding the nature of our response to CSE. When we were elected to this chamber, we take on a responsibility to be open and honest with our dealings. I'm happy that this Ofsted rating, and specifically what has been said about our response to CSE, will make members opposite who have used this issue as a political football reflect on their responsibilities. We must not raise false fears for short-term political gain. And what was more frustrating thing during this period was that the committed and dedicated workforce who were also affected by the negative publicity that these false claims and political shenanigans brought. Both Shirley and I have had the benefit of support and helpful leadership from both Sean and Coldick before him, and all Cabinet members, but most of all, dedicated and committed team of officers with leadership, vision and a commitment to get the very, very best for all our children. Mr. Speaker, I second the motion.
Right, thank you. Any other speakers? Okay, then I invite Councillor Shirley Reynolds to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am honoured to be the Cabinet Member for Children, Young People and Education in an authority that protects, cares and invests in its families, all of our residents. But do the opposition? I am saddened that yet again they're using the care of our children as a political football, and I will not listen to those who have no ideas and no track record of caring for our children. I don't want to go back to being virgin on being inadequate. How dare they try and take ownership of this? The cuts clearly are over the last 4 years, and there's 46% cuts. Dress it up however you like. Your government has taken £118 million from our budget and from our residents. Your Tory government, 46% from our children's services. We have invested an extra 53%, and every single pound of that 53% was from our own commercial investments that you voted against. So do not preach to me about your government cuts and how we are doing our children's services. How dare the opposition say that we don't know what we are doing? I think you'll find we are outstanding.
Thank you. Right, I now put the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please show. That's carried. Thank you. Right, time is moving on, so we need to festinate somewhat. Councillor Tim Nelson will propose his motion as detailed on the agenda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, our sympathies go out to those affected by flooding in Ironbridge and across the borough, and our thanks go to the officers and services whose hard work has stopped a bad situation being much worse. We've heard the words once in a generation. We wish. The purpose of this motion is to reaffirm our commitment as a council and in this chamber to addressing as best we can the environmental challenges that face us. It is not a stick to beat the administration with. It is not pointing to shortfalls. It is restating our aspiration to make a positive difference, which we cannot say often enough. The Council's Cabinet Report and Carbon Neutral Action Plan refer to many issues: plastics pollution, air quality, biodiversity, soil depletion and carbon emissions, which is about greenhouse gas mitigation. How did we get in such a mess? Among the wider public, there is no unanimity on climate change. Not everyone believes in it. This is a problem. It should not be a matter of belief. It is notoriously difficult to change people's beliefs. I'm not sure I should want to try. But to solve the environmental problem we face, we'll need everyone on board: individuals, commerce and the public authorities, everyone. I would not ask anyone to believe in climate change, but something is happening. The wettest February on record. Sea levels stable for 2,500 years and now rising in the last 200, mainly to date because of thermal expansion of the sea and now also due to glacial ice melt. The Thames Barrier, in place for 40 years and deployed 150 times, 28 of them in the last 10 weeks. The North Atlantic is on average a degree warmer than pre-industrial times. There is insufficient space in this speech to describe how much energy warming the whole Atlantic by 1 degree represents. It is a massive amount of heat. Each plus 1 degree gives a 7% increase in moisture content above the sea, which then deluges us with intense rainfall and the 7 floods. The heat has come from more of the sun's energy being trapped by increased greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, from deforestation, intensive agriculture, burning fossil fuels, hence carbon emissions neutrality, enough climate science. Thank you. What to do? We want to help as representatives, as public servants, as passionate, engaged individuals, indeed, as members of my group. We want to be engaged. To date, our permission to contribute has been limited and reactive. The Carbon Report and Action Plan are a start, but we are seeing these documents and plans only after they are prepared and then offered for critique. We do not want to critique. We want to contribute. Before the event, not after the event. Properly cross-party. The threat is accidental, which means it's from outside this chamber and in fact outside humanity. There is no monopoly of brains in any one part of the council. We employ talented and exceptional people, or we want to. This is good. Nonetheless, we should widen the net. I'll give you a tiny example. Environment Scrutiny Committee must provide an opportunity for well-informed and passionate co-optees to participate. Let us spread the load. We need to widen the net beyond the borough. For instance, I see no reference in the reports to the CAT model for Zero Carbon Britain, which personally I don't subscribe to because it would take ordinary people back to the Middle Ages, nor to Project Drawdown, to which I do subscribe. Where are the minutes of the 4 meetings begun with our neighbour councils starting from July last year when we declared an emergency? Likewise, the minutes on climate meetings with our 2 MPs, at least from December the 13th. Has the T&W trustee on the T&W Employees Pension Board considered de-investment in carbon commerce? But members, this is not a critique. I say again, we are here to help. We yearn to help. Something is going on with our climate. It will affect us all, and we are all determined to do something about it. Support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, you wish to second?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'll be brief, which I'm sure everybody will appreciate. Really, this is a very important motion. As I talked earlier when we spoke about the budget, the council is an important part of the issue in the borough, but out of the total emissions, we only represent about 1% of it. To give you an idea, I did a bit of digging around, and actually the second biggest contributor is the Leeton Quarry. So that contributes something like contributed something like 6,500 tonnes of emissions. So there are lots of parties which we can work with to find solutions. I highlighted the challenge of the house building programme we have as a borough. Of course, nationally we've got to build houses, so that's can't be avoided. But there must be ways which we can work with developers to find ways of installing alternative heating, avoiding gas central heating, which contributes an awful lot to emissions. As I indicated earlier, even though the council has achieved an awful lot, and our emissions have been falling by about 800 odd tonnes a year since 2005, the actual impact of all the housing growth means that emissions have actually been going up, something like 4,000 tonnes a year, though in total it's falling because things like offshore electricity generation is reducing the amount of carbon intensiveness in it. So really, as David Attenborough said, a moment of crisis has come, and we all need to work together and do as best we can to tackle this issue. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Now, Councillor Hoskin and Councillor Seymour have indicated they wish to speak. However, we have tabled an amendment.
Speaker, we accept the amendment in its entirety.
Okay. It has to be formally moved and formally seconded. So, can we do that, Councillor?
We accept the amendment in its entirety.
You may, but others may not. Councillor Rhodes.
Right, thank you, Speaker. I wish to... over there, right. I wish to move the following amendment with the additional words with the bold underlining, which is there. Because this is already in our Telford and Wrekin becoming carbon neutral action plan. So it's all there. So I move that amendment.
Right, thank you. Formally seconded. And I'm advised that because it's the mover and the seconder have accepted it, there's no need to have a vote, so it now becomes the substantive. So is that correct? Yes, so I now call upon Councillor Hoskin, who indicated he wishes to speak, followed by Councillor Seymour. Carolyn Healy.
Mr Speaker, I'm going to speak to you as a member of Arkle Ward of this council and talk as a normal councillor. Biodiversity and carbon offsetting, which is in your agenda, I think that we have let ourselves down with regard to the management of environmental issues in Telford and Wrekin, and I'll list them. Not a long list, I tried to cut it back. We've reduced playing fields and playing places through build. We've reduced habitat for wildlife. We've not taken advantage of the successful solar energy plan to take energy from massive business site roofs. Think about it, gentlemen and ladies. We've not produced vehicle powering points sufficiently. We've not developed relationships with farmers' union officers regarding flooding issues. Think again. We've not stopped decimating copse and local parish habitats. We've not reduced carbon deposits but spent money, energy and work time to do so. We've not made total commitment to planting trees for the future. We've not taken any notice of parish history and still build on watercourses. We're still using old lighting even though it has been improved. We've not improved the electricity grid for the massive increase in population. We still allow foul to be ducted into surface drainage. We don't govern the planning issues sufficiently to improve the environment. In other words, our approach to the environment is not sustainable. The green lungs of Telford and Wrekin are being cut down faster than the planting to put back and repair. And Mr Speaker, it won't be long before the Chief Executive Officer will be able to build a posh house on top of the Wrekin and then invite the leader to tea and look down on Telford Council.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jackie Seymour. No, I'm going as well. Can I have tea?
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Whilst I acknowledge that the Borough's Carbon Neutral Action Plan is a positive and very welcome step forward towards attaining a significant local reduction in carbon emissions, there are a number of areas which certainly at this stage I feel are being inadequately addressed. I particularly want to speak about what isn't yet being done under planning. I note this will be looked at during the local plan review, but why wait for that? I believe the very things you're going to be requiring in your new place developments should also apply to all other housing developments. There should be a requirement for all new build house developers to provide solar panels as standard, or initially, at the very least, the necessary wiring should be built in as standard, so that purchasers could either opt to take on the provision of the panels and benefit from the feed-in tariff, or let the developers provide the panels and benefit from the feed-in tariff themselves. You will undoubtedly tell me that there are no current planning powers to allow you to do this, and presumably you will be arguing for these changes. But in the meantime, why do you not offer some incentives for developers initially to engage in low emission or emission-reducing projects on the development sites? Alternatively, you could ask developers to make a Section 106 contribution to make the development acceptable in planning terms as per page 120 of the financial report. Or, just a thought, maybe some of those which are collecting large management fees and providing virtually nothing in return could be persuaded to reinvest reinvest it in their sites. But this shouldn't be restricted to housing developments. Telford is very much a business town, with many industrial sites housing large buildings and units with acres of flat roof space. How many of these, if any, are using these for solar panels or low-emission heating pumps? Perhaps some, perhaps none. We should find out, and if, as I suspect, it is either none or very few, perhaps a short-term business rate reduction could be offered to those who engage. At the moment, the best the Council is trying to do is set an example, and I endorse those efforts. But if anything meaningful is going to be achieved, you need to be much more proactive, encouraging residents and businesses to do their bit as well. And before you tell me to put my money where my mouth is, I have, and I certainly have, solar panels and PV panels.
Right, thank you. Councillor Healy.
Thank you. The amendment that we put forward that the opposition councillors have said they will support, which is great. The reason for that was that it reflects the existing planning work that has been done. However, we accept that that is not the end. It is very clear in the report that came to Cabinet that that action plan is a starting point that will be continually revised with input both from within the organisation and externally. Sadly, when this report was brought to Cabinet, there was no representative for the Conservative group to be able to raise some of the questions that have been raised tonight, and maybe we could have had that discussion then. Scrutiny has been mentioned, and of course that is the vehicle through which we are seeking cross-party report. And as members of the Environment Scrutiny, and hopefully all members will be aware, this issue is actually coming to scrutiny, the Environment Scrutiny Committee on the 18th of March. So again, we are going to be having those discussions. We will be working cross-party. What we'd like to see from that scrutiny is real deep dive work into what else can be in the plan in terms of our own organisational response to the climate crisis, but also recognising that the Council's contribution is relatively small in the scheme of things, what else we can do across the whole borough, and more importantly, the engagement needed to actually bring all of those partners and indeed members of the public in to shape that plan and deliver on that plan. I understand there may have been some frustration up to now as to, and that might be the reason the initial motion was brought, and some members perhaps feel that they haven't been engaged in the development of this initial plan. Fair enough. But only one opposition member has made contact to make any inquiries about that and has had meetings and has been given answers to, indeed, to some of the questions raised tonight. But we will, of course, respond again with written answers as agreed earlier. In view of some of the comments tonight, I just want to remember that when we made our motion, we unanimously approved that we approved in the summer. It was about that we said that we would take communities with us and not adversely affect those most vulnerable. And that's really important that we all remember that. And we also committed to lobby government to do more, because even as a carbon neutral borough, that is still a drop in the ocean of what needs to happen to address this crisis. This is a national and an international challenge, and I hope that all members are as vociferous as they have been tonight in challenging our government to play its part and do much more. Things like some of the things that you've mentioned that need government support in order to be able to ask developers to build carbon neutral homes, that needs national policy to set that. We cannot insist on that. In order to have more solar panels on roofs, we need the feed-in tariff restored to make that viable. So please, we want you to work with us. We all should work together on this. It's too important not to, but let's just get on with it rather than it feels a bit like we've played a few games tonight.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Yanker.
Thank you, Chair. Members, reports recently published by Carbon Brief, a UK website who cover the latest on climate change science, have recently reported the CO2 emissions fell 2.9% nationally in 2019, totalling a 29% fall in CO2 emissions over the last decade. And although these figures may sound good headline news, the startling reality is the target of 61% reduction by 2030 is going to be missed by nearly 30%. So let that be a warning to us all. As a council, we cannot afford to take our foot off the pedal, excuse the pun, and become complacent when it comes to doing our part to reducing our carbon footprint across the borough. We must be bold and radical in our thinking when it comes to tackling this existential threat. For example, this council's current policies prevent the opportunity to develop wind turbines, despite onshore wind farms being the most cost-effective and eco-friendliest way of producing renewable energy. If we are going to take ourselves seriously when it comes to dealing properly with the climate change, we must look into these types of radical proposals when reviewing the local plan in the near future. There is no time to waste as we continue to see an increase of extreme climate events such as the ones we've experienced in the borough, in the gorge with the recent flooding. It is at this stage I would actually like to pay tribute to the phenomenal work the Environmental Agency, Telford Wrekin staff, our uniformed services have all done in the last few weeks. It's been nothing but short of phenomenal around the clock work, and especially with the officers and those on the social media keeping everybody up to date. It's been great work, and I congratulate everybody involved in that. It's been superb. I look forward to continuing our work in the Environmental Scrutiny Committee. We are cross-party, as Councillor Nelson's alluded to previously. It would be nice to be involved in the reporting stage before it's published, and I'm sure we can have a hard discussion about that in the future. And I really genuinely look forward to co-opting members, enthusiastic members with superb expertise that we look to bring into our committee to offer their enthusiastic and, to be honest, phenomenal knowledge on climate change. And we will be supporting the amended motion this evening. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Dugmore.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, this council declared a climate emergency just a few short months ago, something I fully support. I'm not one of the very few members, I am one of the very few members that drives a hybrid vehicle and have done so for several years. Indeed, it's good that the rest of you will be catching up, whether you like it or not, over the next 15 to 20 years. But you see, for any climate change action to make a difference, it needs to be us as individuals who change our habits, as well as systemic changes in society as a whole. That's why I find it strange that there has been no cross-party involvement in drawing up the Telford Wrekin Action Plan. It's too late when it comes to Cabinet. There's no changes then. Climate change and its response is apolitical, and no one political party has a climate change franchise. As we saw in the recent floods, it didn't matter how people voted, they still got flooded out, and businesses were destroyed. And I'd like to add my thanks and admiration to all the services that were active during the floods and will continue to be active. Perhaps this administration needs to take its responsibilities a bit more seriously and realise that with respect to political differences, it's meaningless with regards to climate change. Perhaps if opposition members were involved in the carbon neutral action plan, there might have been more measurable targets. Of the 57 actions, only one, number 24, regarding the conversion to LED lighting is actually measurable and specific. The other 56 actions range from aspirations to vague commitments and good intentions. We'll have no clear idea of direction and success unless we have clear measurable targets. For example, when will all council vehicles be hybrid or electric? The review of the local plan, as we've heard, is an ideal opportunity to alter planning policies so that new build houses have sustainable energy or access to it and the number of charging points. When are we going to have a charging point system installed? The recent flooding is a stark reminder that climate change is happening now, so a collection of woolly proposals won't do. We need firm, concrete and measurable proposals so we can monitor progress and take further action if the results are not as expected or actions taken create unintended consequences. We need to press for permanent flood defences in the gorge, working with Shropshire Council, local farms and the Environment Agency, as well as residents and businesses, to protect the World Heritage Site. If the flooding continues, we won't have a World Heritage Site left. You know, the comments have been made about the visual appearance of permanent flood barriers, but nobody complained about the cooling towers. So why would anybody rail against sympathetically designed flood defences? Mr. Speaker, as you can see, I am no Greta Thunberg. I'm slightly older than she is. However, I understand her frustration at the slow pace of progress without measurable and clear targets and actions.
Could you wind up, please?
That progress is too slow, for which we will all suffer. Please support the motion. All our futures depend upon it.
All right, thank you. Councillor Eade.
Yeah, thank you, Speaker. Before I start, can I also pay tribute to the way that this council and council staff responded to the emergency in Iron Bridge and met the needs, the full needs really, of local people and local businesses that had severe problems. I think it was an example to all of the authorities, and I'd like to pass on my congratulations to all the senior staff and people on the ground that worked with this. I thought it was first rate. So, if you'll allow me to start, again, if you would. Speaker, we become the architect of our own problems and to an extent need to take a step back and review the consequences of our own actions, or for that matter, past inactions surrounding climate change. The boom of house building across the borough has resulted in the significant loss of trees and property-based carbon emissions, which in turn has also led to a further rise in emissions by increasing road capacity. Nearly half of all UK CO2 emissions are linked to the construction and operation of buildings, both housing and commercial. However, the government, I believe, has now clarified that local authorities are not restricted in their ability to require energy-efficient standards above building regulations. Indeed, other councils require new homes to meet a standard equivalent to the Sustainable Homes Code Level 4, which delivers a 19% improvement on current national standards. However, without the necessary policies in place, we face the prospect of having to pay to retrofit new homes with additional energy and carbon-saving measures in 10, 20 or even 30 years' time. And what about New Place? That's already been mentioned, the Council's flagship development. We're only looking for a future New Place development to merely reduce carbon emissions. This is simply not good enough. Never mind reducing carbon emissions, why are we not looking to lead the way in the borough and set an example of new buildings which are carbon neutral? Speaker, we're about to review the local plan and should produce a new energy supplementary planning document to deliver homes and commercial properties that are fit for the future with lower carbon emissions. Now, as for trees, we've suffered a significant loss of many trees in the name of development across the borough, sadly including ancient oaks. And I'm sure everybody here remembers the Apley owl and its flight as it had its home cut from underneath it. Although we've been referred to as a forest city, 4 years after our tree policy was put in place, we have still not increased the mapping accuracy of the borough's tree canopy cover, woodland restoration or regeneration. We urgently need to determine where and what trees we can plant, as other authorities are undertaking to do this by the million to offset carbon levels. Managing green spaces alongside roads and in urban settings can also contribute to carbon reduction. Where are our plans, resources and determination to do such work? Oxford City Council's budget has allocated £1 million of revenue and £18 million of capital investment to address the climate emergency. It's a commitment which puts our authority in the shade at a time when this council is currently carrying record levels of reserves and balances. However, one of the major challenges which lie in front of us is the issue of public transport, which for a borough like Telford Wrekin is both woeful and inadequate.
Can you wind up now, please?
I will, Speaker. At long last, we have a government which recognises and is prepared to invest in public transport. However, the challenge for this authority is to show some maturity and engage with the two members of Parliament, Mark and Lucy, to lobby government together. To do so would be for the betterment of the whole borough. As the Cabinet member says, the Council's contribution is small. Actually, that's not true. The Council here is as a community leader.
Right,
It should be setting an example, which at the moment it's taken a small step towards, but it is clearly not enough.
Thank you. Okay, I have one more speaker listed, and then I will invite Councillor Nelson to reply. Councillor Boylan.
Thank you. I recently went to a climate change meeting hosted by Shropshire County Council, which was open to everyone. From that meeting, it was made clear that to have an impact, it can't be just at a local level, but nationally and internationally. It's clear that people need facts, not fiction, and education on how and we and everyone can work to make the changes. Education, as with everything, is key. There is a lot to look at, a lot that can be changed, and a lot more that can be looked at. And it won't be just a quick fix overnight. So I ask all members to vote for this motion. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nelson, do you wish to respond?
Mr. Speaker, I'm sure we're quite keen to get home. I'd like to thank the members who've contributed this evening, and particularly members from the two opposition to us parties, and particularly Councillor Boylan, because he doesn't speak very often. We've had speeches from people who often speak, but Councillor Boylan doesn't. And members have raised a number of issues that we are all aware of in the context of what this council can do to mitigate the climate emergency that faces us around vehicles or planning or ecology. We did have a comment about playing games. I think that was beneath the member who made it. It was unnecessary. It was a piece of deflection, and I think that comment was necessary at all. We are serious people. We take this very seriously indeed. I personally take it very seriously, and so do we. And we try and think things through. The action plan, which I think we're all going to vote for, is ambiguous whether it's carbon neutral or carbon zero. If it's carbon zero, as a small example, we need to think about the balloon fest, because 30 balloons, okay, at 30 gallons of propane an hour for 4 hours is 1.6 tonnes of liquid propane, which is a fossil fuel derived fuel. I am not Councillor Killjoy. We keep the, forgive me, I listen to you, we will keep the balloon fest, but we need to find sequestration to mitigate the carbon produced. That's how it's done. That's why we raised the issue that the sequestration is not identified. Scrutiny is an insufficient vehicle for us all to work together. It is deeply politicised, and if you attended the last Environment Committee, you'd understand. I was sat on one side, there was 6 Labour on the other side. It was not a mutual process, and there is no lay co-optee. And scrutiny is reactive. It is after the event. We need to be engaged at the time. The scale of clarification of the action plan points that was raised by me and others shows that the action plan itself needs considerable work. Authorship also gives ownership. We want to take part with yourselves in owning a threat which is to everyone in the borough, Labour, Liberal, or, like most people, apolitical. This council is too adversarial, possibly on both sides, but it is too adversarial. This might be one area where we can work together. The subject is not going to go away. Thank you, members.
Right. Thank you. Now, you are aware that the motion, as amended, has been accepted by the movers of the original. We now vote on the amended motion. All those in favour, please show. That appears to be unanimous. Any abstentions? No. Any against? No. Right, thank you. Carried, and I declare the meeting closed. Thank you for your attendance.